Welcome to the group chat with Tara Thomas and Amanda Goodman of Faith and Four-Letter Words.
Good Wednesday morning. I'm Tara Thomas. So happy that you're joining me. I'm soloing today, as you can see. My partner in crime, Amanda Goodman, is off today with family. It's like the old days in news when we would have to say that our co-anchor was off. So I'm happy to be soloing today. We didn't want to miss an episode of the group chat despite my cohort's absence. So I hope you've all been enjoying, if you're in the Midwest, this uptick in the temperatures this week. Of course, that comes with it potential for severe weather, and there were some tornado warnings, and I believe some hail concerns. I know my family in Peoria, Illinois, had captured through their local news station some very large hail. So that is the downside of this, spike in temps with our spring severe weather potential. So I hope wherever you are, you're safe. And I hope if a storm came through, you didn't sustain too much damage, because at this point, we'd cut to the meteorologist to give you the lay of the land, so to speak. But it's just me, myself, and I, to quote a De La Soul song for all of my Gen Xers. So I hope that this week and the rest of your, days ahead in 2026 can be nothing but more positive as we go, right? I mean, I thought to myself the other day, it's crazy how it seems like we were just celebrating Christmas, and now coming into March, we're like a quarter of the way through the year, which it's so true. The older you get, the faster it goes. And the reason from a scientific standpoint that makes sense is because the more years you've lived, the smaller or shorter each year becomes. So when you're 10, it seems like 10 years took forever. And when you're, 50, 60, 70 years old, a year seems like 2-3 months. So it's a strange and sad phenomenon, right? As we age, everything seems to go into almost fast forward. If you're a fan of award shows, this is the season. Always been a fan of the Oscars, despite the annoyances that we all feel sometimes with a certain host that we may not love, or with, some of these celebrities that think that they now are experts in public policy. I still embrace all the elements of the award shows, from the designers to all the red carpet interviews. Used to love Joan Rivers when she made a name for herself doing that on the red carpet for E! Entertainment. And this Sunday is the Oscars. So that is something for myself, my father and I enjoyed. And we would, when we didn't watch it together, as I moved out and got older, we would definitely rehash all the things the following morning. So can't wait to see that. So it's this Sunday, March 15th, the Oscars are happening, or the Academy Awards, as we like to more formally call them. Always interesting. Timothée Chalamet is this incredibly talented young actor. Allegedly, he and Kylie Jenner, one of the Kardashians, have been dating for quite some time. They broke up. So at the last award show, where he's been nominated this year again, I saw that I think he brought his mom, which was a nice touch. But if you have not seen Marty Supreme and you're a Timothée Chalamet fan, you will love that movie. I took my son and my nephew over the holidays. Incredible movie. And I tell you, and also when he was the star in that Bob Dylan biopic in recent years as well, I thought he just was perfection. So huge fan of him. Really know nothing about him in his personal life other than he's a marketing genius, because when he was a part of the whole Timothy, or the whole Marty Supreme show, which is loosely based on a ping pong champion's life, he nailed it, where he went to social media and adapted some of his content around that persona of being Marty Supreme. And I think they even sold a Marty Supreme tracksuit online. So he probably got some tips and tricks from his then girlfriend, Kylie Jenner, who, as we know, started getting lip injections and turned her lip gloss and her lip line into a $1 billion product line. I think she's at this point, because of that, the wealthiest of the Kardashians, which is so interesting. If you go back and look at her and her sister when they were young, on those early days of Keeping Up with the Kardashians, they looked a lot different than the models, Kendall and Kylie, and all their celebrity touch-ups that we see play out today. It's so crazy when you see those before and afters of the celebrities, because again, you've probably seen those memes on Instagram that I think are so funny, where it shows a before and an after of a reality star or a celebrity, and the caption is always something like, the only difference between you and stereotypical good looks is your bank account, right? Which is so true. I love that, because you look back on some of these people and they've clearly benefited in our shallow world of plastic surgery from having some adjustments to their facial features, right? So I'm going to pull up the Faith in 4-Letter Words live stream, since this is the group chat. And since I'm going it alone today, I would love to get some more interaction with our faithful viewers. So funny. I have to give a shout out to my friend Jenny Birdnow. It was her birthday yesterday. And you guys can relate to this, I'm sure. In all of my rush to, scan Facebook and do all the things and the multitasking that a lot of women do every day, I glanced down at what I thought was Jenny wishing her husband Jeremy a happy birthday. Well, it turns out it was the other way around. So I had commented happy birthday to a great guy, and Jeremy messaged me and he said, actually, that's so nice of you, but actually it's my wife Jenny's birthday. So I had to go back in, and give it the laughing emoji and make the correction, because we are just always rushed, right? So we don't always get the context or read the fine print, because we're just rushing on to the next. So that was me not being very careful about how I distributed my birthday messages yesterday on Facebook. Patrice Thompson is joining us. We know you're not the Patrice who's been very critical of Amanda. She said, good morning, blessings, Tara. Glad to see you made it safely through the weather. Yes, thank you. I did suspect we were going to get more severe weather here, but I think it was more to the southeast. So I'll have to talk to my mom this morning in Peoria to get an update, because they definitely were supposed to get more severe weather to the south of us. Also wanted to mention, we've had a lot of people, nice, very thoughtful, very generous people, who wanted to buy the children's book for a child or grandchild in their lives who is considered bossy or assertive, as Amanda and I were when we were young girls. So the new book, The Girl with Big Ideas, has just been going so well in sales on Amazon. And we do have a link to the Amazon books on the faithin4letterwords.com website. So that book is geared toward really initially as young as 3 to 5 year olds, all the way up to probably 10-year-olds, depending on your child's level of content or level of comfort with, reading. But I mean, I think it'd be a great book for a child that's old enough to read on his or her own, because it really does help them feel better about being the one who is maybe the natural born leader, AKA the bossy child. And so I love that that book has been a way to really connect our message with younger audiences. And we have, thanks to Amanda's genius idea about body image, turning it into a relatable book that is in the works as well. And we also, of course, have our 2 original books, Faith in 4-Letter Words, the book, which is really some of a collection of a lot of the stories that we've shared on the road. And then we had the second book come out in December, The Advice That Went Viral. And we really just curated all of our social media blogging, if you will, over the last 3 to 5 years, and took it based on viewer feedback, likes, interactions, all the things. We just looked at the analytics and took some of, the best of the best. So it's sort of our greatest hits album in a book, which is really, really fun to say. So I'm so proud of those 2 books, because I picture someday, Lord willing, my children or grandchildren down the line will pull that out of, a dusty old bin, and they'll say, oh, remember when, Grandma Tara wrote that book, or remember when she and Amanda had that speaking tour. So hopefully it's something that the next generations will look back on fondly, and, we can learn from the older generation. So maybe someday some relative of mine down the line will read that book and say, I can relate to what Tara went through back in the 1900s, because that's what the kids today call all of us that grew up pre 2000. We were a part of the 1900s, which basically puts us back in their minds with Laura Ingalls Wilder, which, by the way, if you want to be interested or entertained, rather, go to TikTok and Google Melissa Gilbert or search Melissa Gilbert. She wears these prairie style dresses and she regularly does dancing TikToks, and it's a little bizarre, I will say. I mean, it makes me think, and I know I shouldn't judge, but it does make me think that she had a little bit of an unusual existence by way of being a child actor. And then when you watch her TikToks today, you will kind of, she has definitely the loyal followers, but you will see what I mean, that she's just kind of a unique individual. So go on TikTok if you're so inclined and check out Melissa Gilbert's TikToks. So wanted to also mention, oh, thank you, Katie. Katie Webb. I don't have children at that age, but I still want to read it. I was definitely the bossy kid growing up, as were we. And I mean, we were the kid who I can remember the first day all the way into high school, the first day of a new semester. And somebody had already told my teacher, it was in economics. Tim Maynard was my teacher. And somebody had already told him, you putting Tara next to her best friend, Kara, or this person, it's not going to work because they won't shut up. And so I had already been moved. My seating chart had already been decided before he even gave me a chance, because other kids had already warned him, that I talk too much. And then down in middle school, many of you will relate to when we had the conduct grades on our report cards. And if I ever got, I would get really strong grades. Thankfully, I really applied myself and did well. But then inevitably I might get, like, my only B would be in conduct. And then I remember at the conferences, in the comments, you know how the teachers used to have the beautiful cursive penmanship, and the comments would say something like, likes to talk to others, or loves to socialize too much, all the things that in some ways you don't want to be a distraction, but were detrimental in the eyes of the teachers. And then as I got older, and those of you that are in these kinds of jobs where you have to talk a lot or use some level of leadership quality, then you say, okay, all of those traits served me well for the person I became and the person that I was and how I showed up in my professional circles, right? So don't think of it as a detriment, especially with young children. Jeannie said, I was a shy and quiet kid growing up. Make up for it at 59. And I want to read the book. I love it. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong, because when it's Jeanne, not sure if it's Jean or Jeannie. And I think she told me at one point, and sorry if I didn't retain that. Nikki said, I purchased it and cannot wait to read it to my 1-year-old granddaughter. I want this to be the book she always remembers. Thank you. That is so special. I love that. And, that's true. You can never start too young with helping to counter some of the stereotypical ways of the world that the pattern, the kids, the patterns we fall into, by really showing them that it is okay if you have an opinion as a woman, and it is okay for a girl to speak up. Because a lot of times, once we get into those middle school years, what I saw was a shift in a lot of the young girls that I was around with my daughter, where they had always been very outspoken. They'd always been very confident. And then in about 6th, 7th, 8th grade, the opinions start to come from the boys, who are now more interested in their looks. And then we hear about all the ways that these girls are shrinking and, almost becoming wallflowers, which is such a huge contrast to the boldness and the brassiness of their younger years. And so we always would encourage my daughter, Charlotte, it's okay to still be putting yourself out there in leadership roles. And I think, thankfully, that is a learned sort of confidence, a rebirth that they will acquire as they move into their later years. But it is tough in those middle school years, because it just kills you to think about your kid being out there in the wild, wild west of social media and having a person bully them or do something that's embarrassing by way of an anonymous post or comment, or snap, as we call it on Snapchat. And I mean, many of you can relate to this. We really held out on getting my daughter access, giving her access to social media platforms. And I think it was when she was in maybe seventh or eighth grade when we finally said, okay, you can have, Instagram or you can have Snapchat. So interestingly, and again, you don't forget these moments. The minute that I first saw her on her presence, right, publicly, like on, I think it was Instagram, I mean, a part of you almost, your heart sinks. A part of you kind of dies because you're like, oh no, this is it. Now there's no turning back. They're throwing themselves to the wolves of vulnerability on social media. So, one thing that I am happy about, and I think there's some wisdom in this, right? You don't want to be so restrictive that your kid never gets to experience it, but you want to put guardrails up, or like Amanda says, you have a right to check their phone. I mean, we're paying for the phones, most of us, right? So I think for me, by not being so restrictive and being open to, yes, you can engage on these platforms where your friends are hanging out, or where, you may want to share a dance on TikTok or share a snap on Snapchat that may or may not be permanent, right? They're temporary. I think sometimes letting them dip their toe in that social media pond is a good thing, because what I found and what I've seen now with my kids, now that they're 19 and 17, is, they had a taste of it and they experienced it, and they have engaged on it, and they still do. But I'm also very aware of now, when I go on my son or my daughter's Instagram, they have next to nothing posted. I mean, my son now has nothing on there. I don't think he ever had more than one post, and he's just a very private person compared to mom. And then my daughter, she will inevitably have, an account, and maybe she'll have some posts, and then a year later I'll go back and look, and she's taken everything down. And so I think a lot of it for her is driven by her faith, where she doesn't want it to sort of own her and really control her time. And so, what a contrast to the moms, Tara and Amanda, with our children, who are much more guarded and introverted on social media, probably, let's be real, because they've been overexposed by moms all the years who talked about them when we were on the news, blogged about them, and then ultimately have given a lot of personal information, glimpses into our lives by way of experience raising our kids through social media. So there is something to be said for some privacy and anonymity. And it's interesting that both her 4 children and my 2 have really seemed to embrace that, again, most likely in part because of mom and Amanda being so over the top, overexposed, and, always engaging. And for us, we always say that it's just an extension of us, right? Social media, because we put so much of ourselves out there, blood, sweat, and tears, right? Warts and all. And so I think it's just been for us almost an impossible thing to separate some, because it's so interwoven into our lives. And right now, those of us who were early adopters of like Facebook, we're benefiting from the walks down memory lane that Facebook serves up to us. And so it is a sentimental element to our day, because you look at those memories and you think, where did these 10 years go? Where did this young kid, where did I lose him? Because now he's, 17 and he's shaving, and you're just like, I don't know when your voice got that deep and you became a man, but it really did happen overnight. And so the boy moms can relate among me, right? The day when they pass you up and then they start having facial hair, and then you're like, okay, this is weird. Now I have like a man child in my home, and I was used to having, the little boy who would still want to sing like cheesy children's songs with me in the car. All right, I got to read some more comments because I appreciate that you guys want to engage. Our friend Alice said, I was also shy and quiet when I grew up. Now my daughter was and is just the opposite, which is great. Isn't that fun when your kid has completely different and opposite personality traits? I think that's always entertaining to see the person they become that can be much different from mom or dad. Also wanted to say hello and good morning to Dana. Thanks for watching. And I also appreciate Whitney, our friend, she shared a photo of her beautiful daughter reading our book. And she said, "We love your children's book in my house." So thank you so much, Whitney, for all your support. Whitney insisted that we come back to her community. So we're planning a show later this summer there that I'll tell you about. And speaking of shows, I have to mention, sorry for all these housekeeping notes, as we like to call them when we cover some of our information in the show, but I wanted to share we do have just two shows that we are building up toward in March. And oh my gosh, thank you so much. The ticket sales have been going so great. So on Tuesday, March 25th, we're going to be in the lovely town of Alden. And what's so fun is they are planning, the women there that are bringing us to Alden are planning quite a pre-show, and they're having food trucks and some vendors, and it's going to be at the American Legion in Alden on Tuesday, March 24th. So we're so excited to be there, and we're all optimistic that by that point, some of the severe weather and forecasted winter that's hanging on will be past us, and then we can all wear, like our brighter colors. I'm actually wearing green today, probably hard to see on the camera, but I thought I'll wear this green dress because St. Patrick's Day is next week. So I'm not Irish, but I definitely embrace wearing the green, and I don't, go around pinching people. But if you're celebrating St. Patrick's Day, you'll have to look through your closet and pull out some of your green attire, and then that can make us maybe feel better about marching the slow and steady march towards spring. The next night on Wednesday, March 25th, thrilled to be back in the lovely town of Jessup. So Jessup is one of the shows where we did, oh gosh, like 2 years ago, a sellout show at the Golf and Country Club. My friend, one of my friends there, Stephanie, is the one who brought me to Jessup, Stephanie Masteller, and she brought us there and connected us with the country club. So the guy who runs it reached out and said, "We'd love to have you back." So we are thrilled to be returning to Jessup on Wednesday, March 25th. And for those of you who've ever come to a show, this whole dog and pony show has evolved now. So we talk about some things differently and we reflect on our lives differently because we're like 3 years in. So we've grown, hopefully for the better, and changed as women. Amanda talks about how back in her more combative years, she definitely was the type that wanted to clap back at people or try to kind of, challenge them or settle the score, so to speak. And now, admittedly, she's matured to a place where she doesn't worry as much about trying to have the last word or trying to sort of, settle something that may never be resolved if it's somebody who just enjoys the conflict, right? So I just respect how she's grown as a person and grown in her faith, as have I. I mean, in 3 years, we've become hopefully better people. And that's what this show and the world of Faith in Four Letter Words with the books and this morning streaming and all the things has really done for us, is it's helped us to heal from some of our past slights and some of the things that when we went through felt very lonely and isolating. And now, by way of being able to talk through it to you and with you and just having this shared community, it's really been like therapy for us. It's helped us heal. And that has helped us grow as women by learning from and having, the guidance of those of you who've come before us, some of the older women in our midst. I mean, I think of my mom and what she has walked through as a widow. And it's just crazy how much time has passed. I mean, my father got sick and passed away within 10 months from diagnosis to death. And when I think about the shock of that for my mom, I mean, 10 months of your life is just a tiny drop in, the bucket of your journey. And to think that that is from the diagnosis to death, that's when my mom's life was completely upended. And she was thrust into this world of initially caregiver and then widow. And so it's been, for me, such an honor. I say it all the time, one of the biggest honors of my life, to go around to the communities across the Midwest where I get to meet these widows in person and caregivers, women of all ages, and sometimes men who are never signing up for how their life turns out, right? Because it always seems like such a far off concept of a spouse dying or somebody getting sick. And in the moment when you're young and you're busy and you're, a lot of you are seemingly healthy, you just never dream at any moment the bottom can drop out, and it will, for all of us. Eventually things are going to happen, good, bad, and otherwise. And so it was just a huge shock to all of my family, because my dad, he was 75 and he was very active. He was working out multiple times a week at Gold's Gym. He was an acting high school principal substitute. So, I mean, all things outwardly seemed great, right, with his life. And in one moment, everything changed. And that can happen and has happened to so many of us, right? And then we long for the day that we took for granted. We long for the things that we, walked through with a very whatever attitude, if only to get those moments, those people, and those memories back, if only to be able to, go back to when your kids were little. And that is fun for me on TikTok. If they're serving up the sentimental content on TikTok, you will recognize the ability to relate so well to those clips where it shows the child as a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 5-year-old, and then they cut to, the video of them today, and they're in high school playing sports, or they're walking down the aisle to get married. And it's like how quickly and fleeting that childhood was. And so you long for those days when you could still control them, when the only thing you were worried about is what were they going to put in their mouth, and were they going to fall and hit their head on the coffee table, right, when they were learning to walk. And so it is crazy how just time does fly, because of that cliche that's so true. The days are long, but the years are so short, and they do fly by. And right now, for me, I'm going through the inching very close to empty nester phase, because my youngest is a junior in high school. So we've already in our minds started to project and think about a year from now and how that's going to look and what that's going to mean for our lives. Because my husband is already retired, I'm still planning to work for the foreseeable future, no question. I mean, many of you women, if you have older husbands, you can relate to planning to work much, much longer than your spouse. And that's completely fine, because it's been a blessing. All the things that he had helped with already at home have now just been, multiplied. Like today, I know his plan is to clean the bathrooms. And so, of course, because I'm a woman, I had to give my 2 cents. And I said, now make sure you use one of those Mr. Clean magic erasers around the drain, and then make sure you, scrub behind the hardware on the faucet on the sink. I mean, I'm giving him my tips as if I'm like his, I'm managing the house and I'm telling him how to do it. But if you have a spouse who is doing a lot of the heavy lifting at home, oh, I'm so grateful for that partnership, because it's so nice. Like on a Thursday when our garbage day is Friday. It's so nice when I come home Thursday night after work, and if I go to brush my teeth and I put, a Kleenex in the garbage under the sink, I'm like, oh, the garbage has been cleaned out, because my husband goes around and cleans out all the garbage cans from the basement to the main floor and puts the garbage out. So the little things that we don't always thank our spouse for, but we very much appreciate. Now, I did have to tell him to back off a little bit on the laundry and the dishwasher, because Mid-American sends us the breakdown of our water usage. Actually, it'd be Waterworks. So Waterloo Waterworks sends us our breakdown of our water usage from one year to the next. And so I did tell him gingerly and respectfully that our water use has gone up compared to a year ago. And that really doesn't make sense, because, we have one daughter at college. And so if anything, we're down to 3 people in the house. And so the water use should have dropped. But admittedly, I'm a bath person, and supposedly you use less water taking a bath. Have you heard this? Because when you're doing the shower, it's constantly running, whereas the bath with the drain stopper, it only can fill so far. So suppose it doesn't seem like it, but supposedly you use less water taking a bath. So the point of all this is to say that I think the reason we're using more water is because he's very much meticulous about wanting to have the laundry done and then wants to have the dishes, including the dog's dishes, cleaned by running the dishwasher every day and running the washer every day. And so clothes washer. So I said, it's fine. We don't have to do it every day. And then you can build up, the bin of whites, the bin of darks, and just be a little bit less enthusiastic. But that's not the good approach, right? Women, we don't want to like crush their enthusiasm for doing these household chores. So I should be grateful, even if the water usage does go up. And thankfully, if you're in Waterloo, I think we do have, and I know this because I've reported or, shared it in a press release, we have the lowest water and sewer rates of any major city in the state. And I say major city loosely, right? Because Iowa's all a collection of small towns, except for Des Moines, but they do have in those larger metros higher water rates than we do here in Eastern Iowa. So that's actually a huge plus. And I actually just talked to our waterworks guy, Chad, a coworker and friend of mine, great guy. And he said they are testing the water thousands of times a year and everything is good. Like we're exceeding the standard. And so I wanted to share that because I feel like a lot of people get so stressed thinking, their water quality isn't good. Now I do try to get the filters regularly in the refrigerator and get the tap water from the filtered dispenser on the front of the refrigerator. And it did just come on yesterday, the notification that we needed a new filter. And so then my husband is so funny. I have him hooked on Chat GPT and AI, and we use it every day. So he said, well, check AI and see if we really do need to change that filter. Is this a scam where they're just prompting you to have to go buy the expensive filter? So I will go online and consult Chat. And I also have my mom and her friends checking Chat, and I do it for them sometimes because I do pay a little bit every month to get the higher level AI access. So I talk about her on the show. Shirley, she's my mom's close friend, another widow who lives down the hall from my mom. And I think she's 91 now, which I thought she was 90, but I think my mom said 91. And you would never believe that she's 91. She's so sharp. She looks great. So they were talking about some medicine she'd been prescribed or some medical situation. And my mom texted me, can you check into this for Shirley? So it's like I'm Doogie Howser and I'm checking the medical information to validate, what I think, really what the computer thinks through this world of artificial intelligence. And so it was good because it just gave her really a second opinion. And Amanda and I do this now all the time. If you get your MyChart results, we screenshot the results and then we run it through Chat before we ever hear from the provider. Now, a word of caution, it can be a rabbit hole and it can be very dangerous because there's no way that advice is always 100% accurate or medically sound even. But it's wonderful to think that there were, tens of thousands of doctors' opinions that were curated into this, what they serve you up, in contrast to one person and one person's take that you would see if you were talking to a medical person in person. So yeah, I'm a huge fan of AI. The distortion of photos is scary. I mean, you put your photo in there and have it create you in another setting and it will probably look nothing like you. So I think they do need to work on perfecting the AI generated images and we all have seen the headshots that people are doing, right? Where they look like 10, 20 years younger. And again, when they change that on their Facebook profile and then you think, oh, wow, they look great. Then you run into them at Hy-Vee and you're like, you look nothing like your profile picture. I mean, we had a case, I had a coworker whose Google photo looked so different from how he actually looked in person that one of my coworkers was going to talk to him about something and she literally did not recognize him. She walked right by him because it was like that's you. Like, again, how you're presenting yourself on social media is a far cry from how you actually look in person. All right, thanks for joining us. I'm soloing today in Amanda's absence. Amanda is on assignment. No, she's actually with her family. So happy to fill the void running my mouth. Okay, here we go. We are hearing from Jean. My son was the complete opposite of me. He was a social butterfly. Always got the talks too much comment on report card. That was definitely my daughter more than my son. Actually, my son though has become a big socializer now in his later years. Whitney, isn't it incredible all the places and people who are so jazzed to have you back among them? Oh, that's nice. Thank you, Whitney. Absolutely. I mean, we love coming to these towns, and some of the towns we had reported about or talked about for years, because at the end of our tag, when we would sign off or we'd toss to the commercial, we'd always usually say 3 towns. So we'd say, like, in Manchester, in Tripoli, in Jessup, this is the blah 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 news. We would say that, right? So that's how I got to know. And watch here, that's how I got to know a lot of the towns. Marcella said, I can totally relate to widowhood, less than 6 months from diagnosis to death. I'm sorry if no one has reminded you about that. We're sorry that you had to go through that, because it is a nightmare, right? And to think that you only had such a fleeting amount of time to process that and then say goodbye. My friend Darlene, close friend in her 80s, she too lost her husband to pancreatic cancer, and it was like a 6 months diagnosis to death journey. And it was awful, because he was this picture of health, walking, miles a day, and just all the things that people try to do, right? The disciplined ways we try to be healthy. And then we know that illness and sickness can strike any of us at any time. And so it's always hard to process. Danielle said, the next stage is the best. I love reconnecting with my husband. These beautiful humans we create consume so much of us, and watching them flourish is the best. I agree. Thank you for that. I have been amazed at the way that my daughter has sort of come into her own. She's a sophomore in college. She's 19. Last year, she did the traditional college spring break. So she's in Arizona. Admittedly, we were not fans of going to Mexico for all the reasons that, you've seen play out on the news. So we were happy that she chose a more traditional spring break route, traditional from the Midwestern viewpoint of going to Florida. So she and her friend Sabrina, they flew from Arizona to Florida. I think they went through Dallas, and they ended up meeting up with us when we were at the start of our spring break. They were on the tail end of theirs. And so we met up with them. They went to Daytona Beach, classic Midwestern, classic spring break destination. And they overlapped with us when we had flown into Miami before we drove down to the Keys. Actually, we went all the way down to Key West, which was another story, because there were some wildfires that caused a delay on the road, and just all the things that, happen when you have this great vacation plan in mind. And then Mother Nature has other diversions for you. She loved it, and she had the quintessential spring break trip where they met like football players from South Carolina, and met these girls that they clicked with, that my daughter's still in touch with. I mean, a bunch of Southerners were down there, of course, naturally. So anyway, this year, now she's older and wiser. She's 19, and she said she's very involved in a church on campus. And she said, I want to do a mission trip for spring break. So she and her boyfriend, Isaac, great kid who's from Kansas City, and a bunch of kids that they've come to be very close with through their church, they are in Denver, Colorado this week, and they're doing a mission where they're going out. And I mean, she sent me a photo. They're building everything from building furniture for a community coffee. I've been around Amanda too much, coffee shop, to doing ministering to homeless people. So what an experience, and what a great example, like Danielle said, of how you can sit back and be proud of who your children now as adults are becoming. And so I'm really proud of her, and I'll have to talk with her more. She's been so busy and very tired with all these assignments that they're going on in Denver that I haven't had a chance to hear all about it. So I will have to catch up with her and share what that experience was like for her. And I mean, of course, you're proud, right? When your kid chooses to live in a benevolent way and wants to be a servant leader or give back in ways that you can do with your time and your treasures, your talents, right? That we've all been gifted by God in my view. So I'm excited to just hear more about her spring break trip. Okay, Joanne Thomas, my mother, thank you for commenting. She said, "You are one lucky woman to have a husband who does everything yours does." Thank you for saying that, Nana. I agree because he was always that way, though. He's just the one thing that I don't have a problem doing is relaxing. So I can sit on the couch and binge watch something and not be bothered at all. But he's always been the type who feels like that anxious energy if he's not doing things. And so sometimes to his detriment, right? Because if you have a husband like this, he's the type where like he'll come home back when he was working and he had to like do all the things before he could relax. And as we get older, then you get like dehydrated or you start to feel like you're going to pass out because you're so busy doing all the things that you don't even take time to sit down or eat or, have a glass of water. So he's trying to get better about that because he has had some bad situations happen, like where he like tripped over a gutter because he was probably trying to do too much and hit his head. And I mean, yeah, all the things. So it's not so then he will say to me, if I ever tell him to like slow down or not go, 180 miles an hour, then he'll say, "Well, aren't you happy? Aren't you glad that I'm this way? And I'm not, somebody who doesn't want to do anything or who's procrastinating." And I said, "You're right. I can't be critical about a person being motivated to do all the things." That is wonderful that Charlotte and her friends are doing mission work for spring break. Love hearing that. Thank you, Jean. I was so excited. Now, the one thing that was interesting, they took two vans from Tucson all the way up to Denver. So it was funny when my stepdaughter, Lauren, was texting us saying, "Now, where is Charlotte?" And then I pulled up, isn't it crazy with technology? I pulled up to find my iPhone and I could see that she was in Albuquerque, New Mexico. And so I said, "Oh, she's in Albuquerque," which, by the way, what a great city. I had never been. And then we drove our daughter down to Arizona when we moved her and we stopped in Albuquerque because that is the scene of some of where they shot Breaking Bad. And there's the house that Walt lived in Breaking Bad, where those of you who are Breaking Bad fans will know they threw the pizza on the roof. And then they also have that, what is it? El Pollo Loco, the Crazy Chicken, which is the restaurant that unfortunately it's a very sordid series where they were selling drugs with the guy who was running this restaurant. So of course we all, my family, we had to go and visit this place because my son is a Breaking Bad fanatic. And we went to the gift shop in Albuquerque, and Albuquerque is known for all of the hot air balloons. And so what was cool is when we were there, we stayed at a hotel that was pretty high elevation. And the next morning we looked out across the valley and we saw all these hot air balloons. And so I feel like even though I was only there for one day and one night, I got a real flavor for the town being in Albuquerque. So that was a place where if you haven't visited, add New Mexico to your bucket list, at least to drive through one time in your life. Danielle said, "That is so awesome. That is on my bucket list to do a mission trip." Mine too. I mean, all my friends who go on these mission trips through their churches say that it's life-changing. And so, I mean, if you have the time and the resources to do it, there is nothing more eye-opening, right, than to see how much people appreciate the things that we are so privileged to take for granted, like clean water, regular food, and clean clothes, and a roof over our head. So one of my close friends is Bob Westerman. He's the longtime morning drive guy for 93.5 The Mix. So he and I have been close friends for years. Back in my early media days, when he was in Waverly on the radio, he and I started to become friends. And then he went through a journey of becoming sober. And now he's been sober for I think 14, 15 years. And he's the one who came to me at work when I used to work in the school system and brought Pastor Q, Quo Vadis Marshall, who's the longtime now and really most popular, one of the most popular pastors in Iowa, based on the growth of Hope City Church. And he said to me, you got to meet this guy. He's the real deal. And the thing about us, ex radio, he's still a radio guy, but me, ex TV, the thing about media people, we're just very cynical and jaded by nature of that business. And so when somebody who's like-minded tells me this is the real deal, I listen. And it was incredible to just meet Pastor Q and just hear him be so passionate and so God-filled in the way he shares his take on life and the perspective that he derives from the Bible. And so I just, from that point on, was hooked. So I started going with my family to Hope City now over 10 years ago. And it's just crazy to see how the church has grown. So whatever situation you're in your faith journey, be it whatever denomination, I wanted to share this morning. I did see a TikTok yesterday. I know it sounds weird that I bring up references to TikTok, but it's a source of news and information for me. I mean, and there's a lot of crap and there's a lot of fake news, but there's also a lot of really, I think, important messaging elements that are communicated through that platform. And I'm glad that, our children can receive some of what matters through by way of these short clips on a platform that was initiated to be more purely entertainment. I think it can also be educational. So that said, this guy was talking about all the studies they've done, right? And the studies, it even includes the guy, I think his name is Dan Buettner, who did the Blue Zones philosophy, where he looked across the globe at the areas where they had the most longevity, where they had the most, octogenarians. And what they found in the case of the Blue Zones, and then also what I heard this guy say on TikTok, is the people who regularly went to some kind of church, religious-based or community gathering that was faith-driven, ticking off all the attributes that resulted were insane. Like, they were less likely to get divorced. They were less likely to be depressed. They were more likely to say when surveyed that they were content with their life. They were happy. I mean, all the things. And so if you're not a person of deep faith, sometimes you need to hear the science that all the rest of us don't need to have as a justification to say, if we're faith driven, we know this, right? We know this. Like, I've said it before, and I don't ever apologize for this. I would never be the wife, the mother, the daughter, the sister that I am today, were it not for being saved at 28 years old and becoming so intentional and committed to having a relationship with Christ, and then growing my faith over these last 20 years. I would be so self-evolved and so focused on, me. And I think part of that we talk about, Amanda and me, is the reality of lives that were lived in jobs where, look at me, we were seeking attention and approval by way of all the sacrifices we made to just be news anchors. And so in some way, maybe we had those insecurities. Maybe we were trying to fill that void. And it's so fleeting, right? Because you're always replaceable. There's always somebody that comes along, as we like to say, that's younger and thinner and will work for less. And so when you evolve to a place where you have that security of self and you know who you are, then you don't feel like you have to prove anything anymore. And you don't need, all the claps or the cheers or the pseudo standing ovation. You don't need any of that, because you have a different level of contentment that for me has come through, my relationship with God. And so I'm grateful that when I met my husband, he and I were not church-going people. He would have called himself a Christian, but he was not intentional or practicing by any means. He had grown up more in the church than I did. But when I was saved at 28, I was already dating him. And then when we started getting more serious and then ultimately got married, that was my line in the sand, basically, was I'm not going to get married and I'm not going to have kids unless we have a 2-parent commitment here to raising our kids as faith, as open to faith and as exposed to faith as we possibly could, insofar as letting them decide what their journey and what their relationship would look like. And I'd like to say, we weren't indoctrinating them, but yes, when you do go to Awana every Wednesday, as they did when they were kids, went to a Baptist church for a while in Cedar Falls, went to Waterloo Christian. And so that would have been like a Baptist sort of lane of Awana. And then I went to Cedar Valley Church on Ainsboro, and then went to Prairie Lakes and Cedar Falls, and ultimately landed in Hope City. Loved all 3 of those churches. So they were regular Sunday school attendees, and they definitely had a conversation with mom and dad on a regular basis that would be infused with references to God is watching, and you're not making choices to do right because mom and dad are telling you. You're answering to a higher power, right? Because the mom and dad only goes so far, in my opinion, because then they see that mom and dad also are human and also make mistakes. And so it's nice to say, but there is a person who's infallible, and he's Jesus, he's God, and he's definitely better than mom and dad in terms of, living close to perfection, right? So I think for me, it was just always comforting to know that regardless of how things played out, my kids had that foundation. And the Bible does promise you that if you pour into your kids as children, that those verses will be written on their heart or stored in their heart, so to speak. And I do think that that's been, for me, as Danielle talked about, when you get to that point where you can just sit back and watch them, that's been a gift for me to see how much my kids now in their teen years, and in the case of my daughter now, her adult years, have taken all of that upbringing to heart in terms of being committed to not being shy about sharing their faith, and then leveraging their faith for good in ways that can be as minute as a decision they make in their personal lives, or a more public declaration of their faith. In the case of my daughter, just wanting to be, it's a cliche, but it is true, the hands and feet of Jesus in the way that they sometimes spend their time and the things they do. And so it's so interesting. My mom and I were just talking about this. My daughter, she's actually going to school with an interest in like sports marketing and graphic design. And then in the last year, she's been so involved in her church and outreach and some of the things that she really has a passion for, that she told my mom recently that she could see herself, possibly working in a church or doing something where she is really driven by faith and wanting to share her faith as the career pursuit that she might want to play out. And so I love that. And I respect my children having that autonomy. I'm not, forcing them into career decisions by any means, because my parents definitely never discouraged me when they could have said, Tara, you've been rejected by 200 TV stations. I don't think this news anchor thing is going to work out for you. But they never dissuaded me from continuing to pursue something that I was adamantly convicted that I wanted to do. And so I'm glad that God did have other plans and helped it come to fruition. But again, some of that, we acknowledge, for me was just teeing me up for my future existence, where I would use my voice in other ways. And similarly, Amanda says, all of that was getting her ready for her more important role, which was being a child advocate. And so sometimes what we think is so important at the time is really just the precursor to what God really wants us to do in our lives, which we don't discover until many years and many struggles later. And then we say, oh, okay, now I get it. Now I understand why I went through this, because you wanted to prepare me uniquely for all the things that were to come that I could have never envisioned, So I definitely feel and relate to people that will say, I never thought I would end up doing this, because when you're young, you see yourself in a completely different light than, what we evolve into. And so that's that's the beauty of life, is how we grow and change. So you look back, speaking of your Facebook memories, you look back at that Facebook post and you're like, I was a complete idiot. Why did I post that 10 or 20 years ago? But that's good. We've grown, we've changed, right? So thanks for everyone who's watching. Monique, our friend from France, she said, and also in Albuquerque, they have the hot air balloons. Yes, exactly. I was so excited to open my window or open the shades in the hotel room and see those when we were there. It was a beautiful part of the country, despite, I mean, you think Iowa is rural, go into these New Mexico back roads and you understand why they always say in Vegas, in Nevada or in New Mexico, that they can use those backdrops for movies where they're hiding bodies, because you are out in the middle of nowhere. And we were close to, I think it's what, SpaceX that Elon Musk. And it does look like, I mean, you're like waiting for a UFO to pop out at any minute. That's how much you're sort of out in the middle of nowhere when you're in some of those desert climate states. Okay. Who else commented? I didn't want to miss anybody's comments. Okay, sorry, scrolling back. No, I think I read everybody's, which is wonderful. Thank you all for engaging with me this morning. So if you are so inclined to watch the Oscars, I want everybody to take note of their favorite outfits, because I always enjoy sharing or sort of rehashing the dresses. And I think it's so fascinating. If you've been watching it all, my mom and I have been enjoying on Hulu the Ryan Murphy take on the Carolyn Bessette and JFK Jr. love story. It's appropriately titled Love Story, this series. It was so fascinating to see that backstory. And of course, it's fictionalized for TV, but it's a great series. So Carolyn Bessette, had been plucked from obscurity, really, working in a Calvin Klein store in Boston by Calvin Klein himself, who brought her to New York. And then she worked with him out of his sort of headquarters. And in the most recent episode, they depict how Calvin Klein was so hurt because Calvin's understudy was Narciso Rodriguez, and that's who Carolyn chose to design her wedding gown when she and JFK Jr. got married in a very secret wedding. And it was out at this island, I think is at Cumberland Pass outside of Georgia, off the coast of Georgia. And you could only get there by plane, and they didn't have air conditioning in this church. And I mean, the way that they depict it in the show is exactly how one would imagine on a hot, summer night in Georgia with no air, when she's running late and then they end up getting married by candlelight. And so she's wearing this beautiful gown. Well, in the show, they depict her having just had her hair and makeup done. And then Narciso comes in, and then he's like ready to like slide this beautiful, silk drape of a dress over her. And then they're like, she just had her hair and makeup done. That's not going to work. And so they show, and I don't know if any of this part is true, but they show him then scrambling and trying to like sew the dress on her so that she can then come late to this church in this remote island. And I just thought that was so interesting. And I need to Google it. I'm guessing because she picked him, because see, they were close because they worked together at Calvin Klein. He became a household name. I mean, Narciso Rodriguez then became a very high profile celebrity fashion designer, and really born out of he and Carolyn, would take smoke breaks in New York when they worked for Calvin Klein, and she just had that relationship with him. So she trusted him to do her dress. And in the show, they depict this scene where right after Carolyn leaves and sort of confirms that she's having Narciso do his dress, then Calvin opens a desk drawer only to reveal that he had already been sketching his ideas for Carolyn's dress that she never acted on. So I don't know if that's true, but anyway, just it's fun. And if you're like me and you enjoy the minutia of some of the celebrity gossip and the Kennedys, it's worth a watch if you have Hulu. And they're releasing like one episode a week. So my mom's going to have to catch up with me when we're together for spring break, because she missed the most recent episode, I think. Or I think I logged in, Mom, on your TV with my Hulu account. So you should be able to watch it. It's 8:00. Oh my gosh. Here I was like, maybe I'll talk for 30 minutes. I always have a lot to say. Thanks for spending time with me. I have a quick Bible verse that I'll share. And we're missing Amanda to do the 4-letter word of the day, but that's okay because she'll be back definitely with one soon. All right, Proverbs, love Proverbs. Proverbs 31, verse 30. Charm is deceptive and beauty is fleeting, but a woman who fears the Lord is to be praised, right? So as we age and as we face like the cultural reality of not looking maybe as youthful or vigorous as our culture demands, especially as women, we can embrace the fact that all of those things are shallow, and what really matters is how are we inside. And when you have that, I guess for me, love of Christ, or you have that affirmation of being comfortable in your own skin and you have that self-assuredness, I feel like you glow on the outside, right? Because it really projects somebody who is confident, comfortable, and clear in who they are. And that is my wish for you today, to be comfortable in your own skin. And like Amanda always likes to say at the shows, you are good enough right where you are right now. There's no weight on the scale. There's no, getting this done or that done or changing this or that about yourself that needs to happen. You're perfectly and wonderfully made just as you are. So I hope you have a great Wednesday. I'll be back bright and early on Friday morning. Again, going it alone, soloing on this Friday. So I hope to see you, and please join me so I don't have to hang out alone. Have a great week.
The group chat is brought to you by the empowering staff at Middle River Cabinetry, Splendore the Medical Spa, and Azalea Lane Boutique.